So welcome everybody to Media Arts Futures at York University. I am so excited for today's event in conversation with game designer Abhi. First, we'll start with the land acknowledgement. York University recognizes that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of the university. We acknowledge our presence, virtual presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Toronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities, and we acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region, which is today covered in its first snow of the season. So welcome to that particular moon. My name is Alison Humphrey. I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Cinema and Media Arts here at York University in Toronto, where I've also had the opportunity to design and teach a new first-year course called Writing for Games and Interactive Media. Shout out to my fabulous students in the audience today. I look forward to all the insightful questions you'll be asking Abhi in the Q&A after the talk. Today's event is part of a new series sponsored by the department called Media Arts Futures, where we invite illustrious speakers from a range of creative realms to talk to tomorrow's media artists about the past, present, and possible futures of their art forms. So it is my honor today to introduce Abhi.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about this talk. I'm going to start by sharing the screen.
Sorry, I was just going to give you a brief bio intro before you do that, so that
yeah.
I'm sure everybody who's here knows who you are, but
Sure.
that gives us an opportunity to bring in those who don't. So Abhi started Visai Games, a Toronto indie game studio, after leaving behind his career in software engineering to pursue his passions in game design and storytelling. He's currently working on Venba, which draws on his personal experiences and cultural background, and he hopes to continue to make more games like Venba that focus on telling intimate stories through interesting mechanics. And now, over to you, Abhi. Thank you so much.
Yeah, okay, thank you so much. Let me start by sharing. Okay, I hope you can all see.
Yes, indeed, we can see.
Sorry, I think there's some difficulties. Sorry, can you still hear me and see me?
Yes, I can see you, but your screen sharing has stopped now.
Okay, let me start again. Sorry.
Good stuff. No problem.
Okay. So, okay, I'll get started now. Hello, everybody. My name is Abhi. I am the creator and game designer of Venba. In this talk, I'll be going over some of the unique strengths in this video game medium that we have, and how even text-heavy games like Venba can use a lot of these strengths to tell the story without text. And that's why the talk is called Textless Storytelling in Text-Heavy Games. So what is Venba? Venba is a narrative cooking game where you play as an Indian mother who immigrates to Canada in the late 1980s with her family. In her travel to Canada, her mother's recipe book gets damaged, and the player has to cook various South Indian dishes to restore these lost recipes while exploring this family's story. The game explores the relationships within a family and how it grows and changes over time. So the structure of Venba is that every level starts with a narrative segment. And usually there's a conflict or something that happens in the story. And these parts typically play like a visual novel. They have dialogue bubbles, you have camera angles, close-up music, and so on and so forth. You can even have dialogue options that you select to have branching conversations. This leads to a cooking segment, which the story usually sets up a reason for the family to cook a certain dish in that specific level. The player here can interact with a variety of different tools and ingredients and combine them in different ways to achieve the dish that they're trying to make. This part here, it plays much more like a puzzle game, because the main hook we have is that the recipe that Venba has is damaged from her travel. So players only have partial information to work with. And this makes the whole cooking process into a puzzle, and the players will use what information they have to try and cook the rest of the recipe. So once the player succeeds, there's usually another narrative section that follows and shows the family, how they react to the food, and whether the conflict that's raised in that story is resolved or not. The main story is about these three characters: Venba, the mother; Pavlin, the dad; and Kevin, their son. And this is a very typical outline in how many mainstream games play, right? There's usually a cutscene, and then there's a gameplay, there's another cutscene, and so on. But the question I ask myself a lot is, with this layout, am I really taking advantage of the medium of games? Can this story be told only through dialogues, or are there more interesting things we can do? Because the fact is, Venba is a game. So can we make this more interesting? Because if not, maybe Venba is better off being a movie or a short film or an animation or something like that. But before we get into that, I want to take a step back and look at a few other games in the industry and see how they approach storytelling. So when it comes to story-focused games, one category of games that I like to call are cinematic games, right? These are traditional games like Last of Us and God of War. They have huge writing budgets. They have motion capture, they have voice acting, they have professional casting, they have grand storylines. They invest a lot of time and effort into these stories. And to me, they feel very much like playable blockbuster movies. However, a common criticism I've heard about these games is that while these games have great story, great dialogues, great performances, they're not really taking full advantage of the video game medium. More importantly, they're not telling the story through gameplay. And I think there's some truth to that criticism. To illustrate what I mean, let's take Last of Us as an example. The game story is about this aging, cynical man named Joel who'll do anything to survive, and the somewhat idealistic little girl called Ellie. And the contrast between them puts them at odds at the beginning of the game. And as they reach the end, while they travel across in post-apocalyptic America, they actually form a much better relationship, and they form something more of a father-daughter sort of relationship, right? And this story is very beautifully told, in my opinion. The cutscenes are great, the music is great, and to me, the direction makes it world-class in terms of filmmaking. But if we look at the gameplay of Last of Us, it is essentially about punching and shooting zombies, right? And here too, it's perfectly fine. It's a solid third-person shooter, but the criticism here is that the story and the gameplay, they don't really complement each other. The gameplay doesn't help tell the story, and that sometimes it's even at odds with it. What I mean by that is Ellie is completely invulnerable during these zombie fight sections. So in the context of gameplay, she's not in any real danger. The reason why the developers made it this way is that they want you to like Ellie. So when you, as the player Joel, you have to constantly take care of Ellie or protect her from zombies, you might be annoyed at her. But by making her completely invulnerable, I think it puts it at odds with the story, because the story is about protecting and growing closer to Ellie, but the gameplay is not. So it does make me wonder, could the game have been designed in a way that you feel the story beats through gameplay itself? Another way to think about this is, let's take the gameplay of Last of Us, right? And then remove Ellie from the story completely, and then replace it with some other character, maybe somebody who's equal to Joel. But would the gameplay have to change to accommodate that? I don't think so. It would need minimal changes to still complement the same story that they're telling. So the fact that the gameplay doesn't have to change while the story can change dramatically itself means, I think, that the gameplay is not used to tell the story fully. There's a very similar issue in the other game, God of War. Kratos and his son, at the beginning of the game, they don't have a great relationship. They have to make a journey, which Kratos is scared, rightfully so, for his son's safety. He feels his son isn't ready. And on his side, he's not ready to open up to his son either. So the game is about how this journey brings them closer and about how Kratos opens up and Atreus becomes a bit more independent. So this is actually a great premise, and this should have a lot of consequences for gameplay, but it pretty much plays like any other third-person action game. It's true that Atreus does learn new skills and he does help out slowly in combat, but you have very little control of that. So if this game story is about parenting, or about a parent-child relationship, the gameplay is not about that. So similarly, you can take the same experiment, right? You can take the gameplay of God of War, change the story to remove Atreus completely, and the gameplay would mostly still work. To be fair, I think it's really hard to address these criticisms. And for what it's worth, I think both of these are fantastic games. It's much more easier, much more straightforward to design an action game than like a parenting game, much less a parenting game inside an action game. But that being said, I do think it's interesting that the best games that we have to offer in our medium are not really telling the story through the game's mechanics. The gameplay and the story, they act as very independent parts from each other. And I think as game developers, we should all think more about this a bit more. On the other side of the table, we have what is known as narrative games, right? These are games like visual novels, like Night in the Woods, Dear Esther. They have a lot of text, a lot of dialogue, and the primary focus of these games is to tell the story. To me, Venba also fits in this category. But surprisingly, I feel that these games don't get the same criticism that God of War or Last of Us does. But I think the criticism applies here even more. Games like these, they usually tell the story purely through dialogue and lots of text that the player has to read. And I feel like these get a pass because these games are so narratively focused that they don't have much gameplay. But even if they're narratively focused games, they're still games. So I think even text-heavy games like these can benefit a lot from utilizing the medium's strengths. Essentially, what I'm talking about is that in filmmaking, there's the golden rule called show, don't tell, right? Movies are a visual medium. So instead of just relying on dialogues and the script, the idea is to tell the story through cinematography, camera shots, acting, and other visual techniques. But if that's true for movies, then I think for games, we should look at it as an interactive medium because that's what sets games apart. And we should try to tell the story through interaction as much as we do through the other techniques like the text or camera shots. So that brings us back to Venba. And to be clear, I think a lot of the problems I've listed actually exist within Venba too. These are common design problems that exist across the industry, and I think we're all trying to solve it in our own ways. I still grapple with the question, is Venba taking full advantage of the medium? Is it better off as a movie or something else? But for the rest of the talk, I will showcase the different things we do in this game that I think are interesting and can permit a lot of learnings. So the first big one is environmental storytelling. And this is a very, very big tool in a lot of games. Every game I've listed so far definitely uses a lot of these, right? And Venba 2 relies on this quite heavily. So in Venba, the way it works is that every level, once you complete a level, time actually skips forward quite a bit. So when you see the family first in 1988, the next time you see them might be in 1994, and then 1999, and then so on. So there's a lot that changes within the family between these time skips, and we rely on the environment to communicate this information. So here's an example. In the opening level, this is the house that they live in. And right off the bat, you can see that, the paint is peeling in the walls, the couch is torn, there's nails everywhere. They're using a radiator as a heater. And all of this communicates a couple different things, right? One, it communicates the financial status of this family. And two, it communicates that they're new to Canada. They're still learning how to grapple with this country and how to live here. But fast forward to a few levels later, and many years later, the house is much more fancy. It's much more organized, much more assimilated. It's bigger. And you can sense that they're more financially secure now. So just without dialogue, without any text, we can immediately communicate to you where the family is at right now, right? But this is pretty standard across all games. I think we can push this even more. And one place where we do that is in the cooking. And so more than anything in Venba, we put a lot of thought and effort into what dish you cook in every level. For example, in the first level, you make something called idlis, which is a breakfast staple. And idli is a very simple ingredient. It's only made of batter and dal. And it makes perfect sense as the first level because it's an easy recipe for the players to start the game with. But it also makes sense from a story perspective because idli doesn't require many special ingredients. So Venba, who's new to Canada in the 1980s, when the community here isn't as big, she wouldn't have access to those special ingredients either. So it makes sense that she would cook something like idlis, right? But in 2006, you as the player, you cook biryani, which is much more complex and requires a much wider array of special ingredients and specialty spices. To me, this also shows the growth of the South Asian community in Canada, because by 2006, it's much less expensive to get these spices now, and you don't have to travel far and things like that. Okay. So the next tool that I want to talk about is leveraging UI. And I want to talk about how even game UI can be used to tell the story. So one of the key things we wanted to show in the game is the challenge around language and immigration. Pavlin, the dad, back in India, he was a fantastic writer. He has a great command of his mother tongue, Tamil. And when he comes to Canada, there's no job for that, right? So he's forced to use his second language, English, a lot, which he's not as quite proficient in. So how do we show that how do we show the skill difference between these two languages when Pavlin speaks? There's two ways. One obvious way is to do it through the dialogue itself, right? He can use big words and flowery language when he speaks in Tamil, which makes sense because he's a writer. But and then he can use simple words and even make grammatical mistakes when he speaks in English, right? But I think with video games, we can do something even more interesting, which is we can change the text speed with which he talks, right? So when he speaks in Tamil, the text speed is much faster. The words come out quickly, and those things suit his personality. But when he speaks in English, the letters come by one. It's much more deliberate. It makes the players feel uncomfortable. And to me, that's perfect because that's what Pavlin is feeling, right? He's feeling uncomfortable to speak in English. And we can do the reverse with their son, Kevin, right? He can speak English much faster than he speaks Tamil. And we can even show this through the levels because in the beginning, when his exposure is primarily his family, his Tamil speed is fast. But as he grows more and more assimilated and gets better at English, his English speed increases, but his Tamil speed decreases. And I think this is a really neat way to show a lot of different things about these characters with a very simple thing like UI text speed, right? Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is leveraging gameplay itself. So in Venba, the story takes place in such a way that you cook as Venba for the beginning few levels, and then in the later levels, you cook as Coven. But there's a huge difference between the two of them when it comes to cooking South Asian recipes. Venba grew up in India. She has cooked these dishes all her life. She has ate these dishes all her life. So she knows them really well. She's like a master chef, right? But her son, Kevin, at least when it comes to South Asian cooking, he only attempts to connect with them after he's fully grown up. So there's a massive skill difference between the two of them. So how do we show that when we play the game? So if you notice in the top left, there's a UI element that says idli batter. Whenever you mouse over any object in our game, there's an ingredient prompt that tells you what the ingredient is, and this helps the players understand, players who are new to these ingredients understand what they're used for, right? But the way we've made them is that they behave differently, very differently if you're cooking as Venba versus when you're cooking as Coven. Um, and to me, so if when when Venba cooks, when you as the player is playing as Venba, these ingredient prompts show up perfectly fine, they show up fast, and it works. But when you play as Coven, there's a delay in how they show up. Sometimes they show up wrong and then they hastily correct themselves. And to me, this makes perfect sense because when you play as Coven, you're cooking these alone for the first time, and there's a lot of doubt and hesitation. And when you play as Venba, who's a master chef, cooking these should be much easier than we're cooking with Coven, right? So this minor change in gameplay helps us reflect that. There's one more thing we do here. Every time a cooking level starts, we play this really slick animation where all the tools and the stuff, everything flies in really cool. And the idea is to get the player super excited about the dish that they're making. And this works when you play as Venba, but when you play as Coven, we turn that around in its head. So you can see that the ingredients are showing up in a very jumbled fashion. Things fall down. Some things are too fast, and this is a very fun and easy way to show the differences between the two chefs again. And then finally, I just want to talk about how cooking can be fun versus not, right? So as game developers, our biggest task here is to there's all these talks about how every action you make in a game needs to be fun, needs to be polished. For the players, it needs to feel good. So whenever they press a button, whatever action they're executing, we have to put a lot of effort into making that action feel intrinsically good. And we do, especially for a cooking game, that's really important. And we do that, right? So when you slice a fish, the VFX department, the sound effects department, everything comes together to really make this action feel good. But the question I ask myself sometimes is that, should cooking always feel fun, right? So cooking is not just fun. Sometimes it's also a lot of work. So when we want the gameplay segment to feel like work, because that's what the story is about on that particular day, we actually try to optimize it, not for fun, but instead for the player to feel the monotony and the labor that's involved in cooking. And then here's a great example. So in this segment, the player has to grab batter from the left and then pour it on each of the slots that you see here. There are 7 slots, right? And then they have to pour oil on these 7 slots. They have to flip it 7 times, and then they have to pick it out 7 times, right? That's a lot of actions, and it really adds up. By the end of the segment, it's going to feel really monotonous for the player. But this is on purpose, because if I wanted to optimize it, there's a very simple fix, right? All I had to do is when the player grabs the batter and puts it on the pan, I just make all 7 slots fill up immediately. I could have done that, but by making the player feel the monotony here, I think it also makes them appreciate the labor that Venba is putting into this segment. So obviously these tools are very powerful, and I wouldn't do this across the game, but every once in a while, or depending on what the level is going for, it makes sense to even question core principles of game design, that every action of the game should be fun and stuff like that, and try to turn it around its head to better serve the story. Okay, and yeah, that's pretty much it. These are just some of the many examples we have. There's also so many other departments we can use, like sound and music, that can be leveraged in different ways, and we do that. I just wanted to showcase some of the ideas we had for Venba, and how, just because the game is narratively focused and text heavy, I don't think it should forget that it's a game, and it should still try to utilize a lot of the strengths that the medium has. And I hope that this talk has given you an idea about what those strengths are and how we can use those tools. When it comes down to it, I think we have to remember that games are an interactive medium. And a lot of times the feelings that we try to communicate, they happen inside the player's head as they play the game, right? So we have to focus on the core interaction itself and try to tell the story through that. And yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for listening.
Wow, that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. And it perfectly fits in where we're talking about interface and dialogue in the class today. So you're getting a ton of love and and applause from the chat. There was also a lot of love for the art. And
Yes.
I know that your artist is also Toronto-based or Oakville-based, right?
Yes, he's Toronto-based. His name is Sam Elkana. He's fantastic. This game wouldn't be possible without him. He's yeah, amazing.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, we got some good artists in this class as well. So I know that they've got an eye for it.
Awesome.
Brilliant. So I'm going to just sort of start out asking you a couple of questions, and then that'll give people the opportunity to put their own questions into the Q&A. We got 2 already, but I'd love to see more. So just sort of starting out with that thing that you are a Toronto-based indie game developer. This is your very first game that you're releasing. What is that like? What is the scene like here? How is it being your own your own publisher?
Yeah, it's been pretty surreal. We didn't expect the level of reception that Venba has been getting, to be very honest. Venba, I started Venba with Sam when we were both working full-time jobs. And the idea is that we would work weekends and we'd put out something that's very personal to us, regardless of it's sold well or not. But eventually it started getting enough reception that we thought, okay, maybe we can make this full time. So we had a really hard time getting the game funded in terms of publishers, because the game is very atypical, right? Like with what kind of game it is. So it's hard for them to fit into mainstream ideas. But what happened was when we showed the trailer for the game, at a Wholesome Games showcase, it really blew up, and we didn't expect that at all. And like that sort of proved that there's a market for this game. So we were able to, like, after 1 more year of full-time development, we were able to like slowly transition from that and quit our jobs to get into the scene. So it's very new. We just did that I think halfway through this year, but it's been a great journey, and we are finally, like, we're in the finishing portions of the game, so it feels very it feels like the end of a big journey, and it's set up to come out next year, so we're really happy about that.
That is so exciting. And am I right in remembering that you were going to be trying to find a publisher to publish for you, and then because it blew up, you were able to
so what happened is we actually were able to bypass the need for publishers, because we had a bunch of different opportunities. Like, we had platforms reach out to us. So a lot of things that you need publishers for, we were able to do that ourselves because of the success of the trailer. So even though publishers reached out after that, we were the ones who were able to say, like, no, actually, we don't need that right now, which is a really good spot to be. So we are grateful for that.
And I'm guessing that one of those is an announcement you just made this past week.
Yes. Yeah. Last week we announced that we're coming to the Nintendo Switch, which is a very exciting announcement that we really worked hard for.
That is fabulous. So currently, Steam and Switch, how much extra work is it for each additional platform that you're going to be having to release on?
It is a lot of work. I wouldn't say the game itself is a lot of work, because it's the same game across the 3 platforms. But when you're an independent developer, there's so many logistics that's related around making these games. You have to get the store pages ready, you have to sign a lot of documents, get a lot of packages. So those things I would recommend get some independent partner to deal with those things, so that you can just focus on the game. It is a lot of work, but it's definitely worth it. Yeah.
Fantastic. This is brilliant. All right, well, let me switch over to the Q&A and ask the first question. Michael is asking, how did your focus shift from software engineering, which I believe you studied at U of T, right? At University of Toronto, to game design and storytelling?
Yeah, so for me, it was always the idea that I picked software engineering to get into game design and storytelling. So one thing back when I was in grade 12, which is I think 2011, there weren't too many great game development programs back then, right? So I was talking to many people, I was very confused, and one person gave me really good advice, which is try to think about what you want to do inside the game industry, and then focus on studying that skill somewhere else, and then you can get hired as whatever you want, like whether it's an artist or a programmer. And for me, the skill that I was naturally inclined towards is like programming. So I decided to get a degree in computer science, and even then I was just focusing, like all my colleagues were focusing on like the FANG companies, right? But like Facebook or Google or something like that. But I was mostly focusing on building side projects and games and stuff like that. And in the fourth year, we got a opportunity to participate in the Level Up Showcase, which happens in Toronto. And through that, we did really well in that. And through that, I was able to get a job at a mobile game studio. And that's basically how it worked out. Yeah.
Fantastic. We have a question from Basma. What program did you use to plan everything out?
That's a great question. I think so. One thing about me is I'm really terrible at organizing or planning out like running production stuff. So I hired a producer to help me out, Sharon, who's fantastic with this. So she has spreadsheets after spreadsheets after spreadsheets, mostly in Google Docs that she uses. Apart from that, we use ClickUp, which is a task management software, but there's also Jira and other things that are equivalent to that. But I would say more than software, like either be a person who's good at this production stuff, or find somebody who's good at it to do, because that stuff is really important. It helps. Like as creatives, we might think like, oh, they're the foe, right? Like because they're more concerned about timelines and they're cutting down your vision, but they actually enable you to achieve your vision, and it's super important.
Yes, we got Albertine in the chat saying producers equal unsung heroes.
Yes, 100%. Yes.
Yes. We have a question from John asking, when you time skip into the future, do you still maintain the conceit of damaged recipes with partial information? I'm imagining it would be tough to do that when you could Google a recipe in 2006 and then get most of the ingredients for kind of cheap relative to the prices of the 90s.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. So the point of the whole recipes is that the recipes are Venba's mother's recipes, right? So to her, it's not about learning how to cook a dish. She might actually know how to cook the dish that we're cooking already. For her, it's about learning how to cook it exactly how her mother did, right? So to me, that plays into that whole idea that no matter how well we cook, it never compares to like how our mothers cook, right? And it's true for me in my life. I cook so much in my life, but it doesn't hold a candle to how my mother cooks, right? So Venba, who moved from India to Canada, has a lot of guilt for moving in the first place. So the way she deals with that guilt is like she tries to feel closer to home by trying to recover these recipes. And then it's cyclical because as Kevin grows up, eventually he tries to do the same thing also in the later levels.
That's fantastic. And did you actually take recipes from your own family, or how did you find the recipes for the game?
Yeah, so for me, initially when I started, I was like, oh, let me just put everything that I like to eat and stuff like that, right? But I actually think that's not the best perspective, because I quickly realized that Venba's reception means that a lot more people are going to play this game than I expected initially. So for a lot of people, this is going to be their introduction to a lot of these dishes, right? Even in our Nintendo Switch trailer, most of the people couldn't recognize a lot of the dishes we showed off. So I think it's a very important responsibility to not just, when you have a platform like that, to not just show the recipes you like, but actually show recipes that your entire community thinks about, right? And then there's also, you also have to balance that with like what recipes make sense as good gameplay puzzles, what makes sense for the story. So it is a huge balancing act. And the first thing I had to kill was like things that I liked, which is okay, I think, because the game is, even though it is a cooking game, it's also about the story that we're trying to tell.
Fantastic. We actually have a comment in the Q&A from Haroon saying, I love the idea of this game and the representation it showcases. Now I can finally cook virtual biryani, lol. I'm definitely getting this on Switch.
Awesome. Thank you.
There we go. So this is from Anonymous, asking, how did you and the team decide what elements of Venba should be diegetic versus standard UI? And maybe you can explain for those in the audience who don't know what diegetic UI is.
I actually don't know what they mean by diegetic here. Like, I understand the term, but I'm not super clear how they mean it. But I think they mean things like some of the UI components are rooted in real world stuff like tools and recipe books. So instead of having a nice button for it, it's represented by an actual object. So for us, that process was pretty straightforward. Like the idea is most of the UI comes into play when you're cooking, right? So the idea is to represent or recreate the kitchen as much as we can. And when you focus on that, I think it automatically makes sense. We try to keep as many real elements as possible. Things like the stove button and stuff like that. Like we made sure that it's super satisfying to click and turn on. Yeah, a lot of it is interfacing with traditional tools. So when it comes to like the idli level, you're messing around with these idli plates, which are these unique tools we have back home. So we really decided to focus on that instead of making it. We wanted to make it feel like you're touching these things with your hands, right? So those things make sense to be diegetic instead of traditional UI. Yeah, so that's basically it.
And did you have to like order an idli set and send it to Sam Elkanah to study, or?
Yes, actually, yes, we did. So before the pandemic, the idea was that when I pitched the idea to Sam, I actually took him to a South Indian restaurant, and we ordered food, and then we talked about the game so that he can get an idea. And he was very open to that entire experience. And the whole idea for me was that the team would decide every level what recipe we would cook together, and I would actually cook the recipe for the entire team. We would eat it. We would get familiar with the process. That was the idea we had. But because of the pandemic, like that put a stop to all of that. But now we are trying to like play catch up. So every once in a while, when it's safe, we either go to a restaurant, we try to eat the thing. We just finish a level, we go to a restaurant, we try to eat it. So things like that. It's a lot of fun.
I actually just saw Shell Games, Jesse Shell's company, has a dinner with the devs event online. So maybe you can actually do that with your team for your fans at some point.
Yeah, that sounds great.
When you can breathe, once you've finished launching. So on that note, Sammy's asking, how was the process of porting your game to the Switch? And did you approach them, or did Nintendo approach you?
Yeah, we were very, very lucky that Nintendo approached us multiple times, actually. Even for the showcase, they asked us a couple times, and we weren't ready to show it off. So they were really open and really nice. We really lucked out for that, and I think a big part in that, more than the game, I think it's the art style that's really inviting people. It catches people's eyes immediately, so once again, credits to Sam Elkanah for that.
Fantastic. And this kind of is a good segue into a question from Shruti. Hope I pronounced that properly, sorry. How do you pick the right moments to make a good trailer?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't know if I do, right? Like I just make the trailer. I watch a lot of Tamil movies. I'm a huge fan. So I just actually made both the Venba trailers are made to an original song that we composed right for the trailer itself. And I just cut it like you would for a Tamil trailer. I think that really fits given what the game's subject matter is. And I think that's working. For overall for the trailer, I try to keep a good sense of, uh, for players who see this for the first time, they're going to be so taken aback because there's so much new things. I try to, just showcase it, and then I try to sell them on the strong points of the game, which is the art, the sound, the music, and the idea that you're cooking. Yeah. You should. There's a person called Derek Liu, I think. He makes a bunch of trailers. Yeah, I'll post his website on the chat. Um, he gives a lot of great talks on how to cut a good trailer. Yeah, he's fantastic. He made the trailer for Half-Life Alex. Recently, he made a trailer for the Among Us VR launch. He gives a fantastic talk, so I think he can definitely answer that much better than I can.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that resource. Oh, and John's mentioned he did Spelunky 2 trailer too. So Bradley is kind of going more broadly and saying, what are some different ways that you plan on marketing this game?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a game like Venba has a lot of unique strengths, right? But so far, it's been enough to just show off the game, and I think a lot of the marketing is actually baked into the game itself, and I think we should all keep that in mind. Sometimes, if your game is generic, if it's like a 2D platformer and it's not setting itself apart, then it's really hard. You have to make the best trailer, you have to make the best music, you have to make the best moments, but if the game stands out already, if it's something that press wants to write articles about already, half your job is done for you, right? So but that being said, we are doing a lot of different things. On Twitter or TikTok, we do like match cuts where we cook the actual recipe and then we cut that to the gameplay, and then we show how it almost matches 1-to-1. There's a lot of unique ways we can do that. We have collaborations with Twitch streamers who are cooks, and we try to push on that angle a bit. Yeah.
Yes, Albertine is saying, whoa, okay, I need to follow y'all on TikTok. Yes, everybody follow. You're on TikTok and Twitter. Anything else?
Yes, I can link both of them here. I don't know how much longer Twitter will survive as a platform, but we are on Twitter currently. That is our biggest platform.
Speaking of burning in the kitchen. Great, thank you for those links. Brilliant. John is asking, what's a good recipe in Venba that would feel good to eat on a snowy day in Toronto?
Oh, that's a great question. That's a great question. There's so many, because a lot of food in Venba is very spicy, and anything spicy is good on a cold day. There's this version of when you have a cold or when you have a flu, the cold chicken noodle soup is a go-to thing, right? There is a very Tamil version of that. It's called chicken rasam, and that I think is fantastic. It has a lot of pepper, like black pepper, a lot of liquids, fluids, and it's almost like eating a soup from chicken stock, and it's fantastic for whether you have a cold or it's a cold day. Yeah.
That is so fabulous. So I'm kind of going to take us back in time a little bit. When I first reached out to you, I kind of said that my family immigrated to Toronto around about the same age that you did. And I would wonder if you can kind of talk about your sort of history with games and, the experience with games in India before you moved here, and then your experience with games and, bringing it up to the present day, what the indie scene is in Canada, maybe in relation to other parts of the world that you might be familiar with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, gaming in India is actually very interesting. I grew up, so gaming in India is, even now, the Nintendo Switch is not available officially in India, right? So they can only get it through third parties and stuff like that. So a lot of the people who are commenting on the trailer, like, this looks really cool, but I can't play it on the Switch in India, and I felt pretty bad about that. But that extends all the way back even when I was in India. The NES wasn't released there. Instead, we had a bootleg version called the Terminator, and then that's what I played growing up. And then when I was like 11 or 12, I played Pokemon Blue and Red on the PC using an emulator and a ROM, but I didn't know that it was an emulator or ROM because nobody's seen a Game Boy. Nobody knows that it's meant to be played on a handheld. So you can't even finish the game because you have to trade Pokemon to finish it. So we would always get stuck at like, I don't know, 137 Pokemon or something. And then I immigrate to Canada, and then it's like PS3, Xbox 360, and like, what the hell is going on? It's a brand new world, right? And for me, honestly, it was a dream come true. People took games much more seriously there. Here, games are seen as a serious career, and it really helped me sell it to like my family and everything. As in, this is something that people do as a real career. It's not. I'm not just doing this because I like to play games all the time. But what's interesting is I've been talking to game developers back in India, and the scene is really growing now. There's a whole midnight lineup at an Indian GameStop for God of War Ragnarok, which hasn't happened before. So this people are growing up, people are getting exposed to this, and I talk to a lot of indie game developers back in India, and when they see a game like Venba getting a lot of reception, it gives them also hope, because the ideas that they had is like, oh, we should make a Western game because those are the games that sell. But being in the West, if I can make an Eastern game, they can definitely make. I'm sure they can, make much more authentic, much more representative games that I can, because they literally grew up and live in India.
And can you kind of recommend your sort of favorite Indian game? If people
So there's a game called Raji, an ancient epic. It's like I'll link the Steam here. Second. So these developers, they have a great success story, but they struggled a lot to release this game. They had to sell their house, actually, but it all paid off well, and I'm really happy they stuck with it. So 100%, I would focus on them. Yeah.
Thanks for the recommendation. John is saying, Abby, don't sell your house.
If you all buy the game, I don't have to.
A good guilt pitch. Awesome. So we have a comment from Mayuran, who's saying, as someone who identifies as a Tamil person, I was super excited to see my culture represented on the video game scene. Apart from the recipes and the clothing, how else do you educate or ease other players who may not be familiar with the Tamil culture?
Yeah, so this I actually am really, really happy with. I'm also very, I have very strong feelings about being a Tamil person, and that's something I identify with very strongly. So for me in the game, the best way I can describe it is I'm very unapologetic about the fact that this family is Tamil. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of small decisions. Like when I see other games that do the whole representation thing, I see them taking steps to cushion people who are new to it, to ease them in. But I stubbornly decide not to do that. Like instead, I just prefer to like just push them directly in it. Like in the opening level, there are words in the sentences that are Tamil words, and let them just deal with it. And players do, right? They're naturally curious. They look it up after. I would much rather do that than explain what each word means and stuff like that. Apart from that, there's also, but there are a lot of interesting things we do actually. So there's a radio in the game, and every level, Venba turns on the radio before she cooks. And the idea is that the radio plays songs. So if it's in the 1980s, it plays the songs from the 1980. If it's a 2006, it plays a song from 2006, right? So to do that, what we did was our in-house composer, he actually recorded songs that sound like songs from the 1980s or 2006. So we look at composers that we grew up listening to, music directors that we like a lot, and each song, each level plays like an homage. Like what would it be if they compose a song for us, right? And these songs are completely written in Tamil. They're recorded, they're sung by Tamil artists, and they just play in the background, and I think that's fantastic. Apart from that, there's also every level begins with the calendar, and the calendar shows where the players are, like which year it is. And the calendar features the great Tamil poet called Valluvar Tirukural. So every it has like a proverb, and the proverb is in Tamil and also in English, but it also fits aptly to what's going on in the story. For it's more environmental storytelling, but that's one more thing that we expose the players to.
And
sorry, that was a long answer, but yeah, there's a lot of things we do. Yeah.
Fabulous answer. Yeah. And on your Twitter, and I'm assuming your TikTok, which I haven't checked out yet, but there's at least one music cue that you posted as a teaser.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, it's the music in the game I'm really happy with. I think the composer is able to make something really special. And for the last level, we were actually able to reach out to a Tamil artist who's pretty popular, and he's actually making the last song for the game, and I'm very excited about that too. Yeah.
And sorry, the composer's name again is?
Oh, it's not revealed yet, so it's going to be. Oh, sorry. Do you mean the in-house composer or the?
Sorry, the in-house composer. Yeah.
Yes. Sorry, I'll link his Twitter too. His name is Alpha something.
Fabulous. It's such a memorable name. Great. So we have a question in the Q&A from Arvin asking, how did you guys deal with any writer's block?
We deal with, I don't know, we're still dealing with writer's block. There's this one section in the biryani level, we haven't written the last section. And there's a task for that on ClickUp. And every week, Sharon asks me, hey, any updates on this? I'm still pushing it. But I don't know. I don't think there's any good way to deal with writer's block for me. I'm still hoping it clears. For me, I try to, I really write to music. So it's when I listen to a song, that's when I get the ideas for a game. And that's how Venba happened too. So if I'm too blocked, I try to go back to the initial song that inspired the whole idea. Yeah, that helps. I watch a lot of Tamil movies that I really respect, and that usually helps a lot. Otherwise, I just brainstorm with my team and then say, what do you think we can do? And then that usually creates ideas that are helpful. Yeah.
Wonderful. So Anise is asking, I want to learn more about your experience in the game industry. Does the network have a role in creating and publishing a game?
What do you mean by net? Oh, like does networking have a role in? Yeah, I would say so for sure. But that's something we didn't have. We like barely anybody knew about us. So it was hard for us to like understand how do publishers work, how to pitch to publishers. I thought like I watched a bunch of GDC talks and all those things, right? So I thought I knew, but there's still so much I didn't know. I would say reach out to people. And honestly, if you feel free to reach out to me now, because I have talked to a bunch of publishers. And so if you have a game idea, if you're trying to get published, please do feel free to reach out to me. We have somebody called Eka who runs a studio called Outer Loop. They're also making a cool game called Thirsty Suitors. He saw Venba and he reached out to me, and he was able to give me a lot of advice. He actually prevented us from taking a very bad deal. Back then, we didn't know it was a bad deal because we were desperate for anything, right? So network and contacts are super important. And now that I've been through the experience, I think I can at least, catch any red flags. So if anybody here is thinking about getting into the game industry, which I'm sure a lot of you are, please do feel free to reach out.
That's incredibly generous. That's paying it forward. Thank you. John is agreeing in the chat that Thirsty Suitors looks dope.
Yes.
I totally agree. The trailer that I watched. And his question is, his next question is, how has COVID changed your development process or the Toronto indie scene in general? It seems like a lot of places that you could demo a game have shut down, and I'm not sure what replaces it.
Yes, you're 100% correct. I miss this a lot. When I used to work on other games before, the biggest thing for us was to show off the games and events and It can be private. You can still get a lot of feedback. I hope somebody fixes this. But I know Gamma Space used to have like the co-working thing that got shut down recently. So I really miss that too. Slowly, I feel like events are coming back. There used to be this thing called Torontaru. I hear that it's on the works to come back. I think it's a part of returning to normal, and the world is slowly coming back. And if it does, it'll be great. Personally, I do miss working in the office, especially for game development. I think there's so much collaboration that's needed. Being in the office solves a lot of that, and it's hard for me when I'm cooped up in my room, and it's hard to be creative, so I hope once this is a bit more clear, I would love to have some public co-working space where like many game studios have their employees show up and work. I think that would be fantastic. But yeah.
And I suppose there's a flip side. One of our previous speakers, Susan O'Connor, was mentioning that the pandemic and everybody kind of jumping on Zoom has changed this sort of landscape of opportunity for workers in the games industry.
Yes, yeah, actually that's 100% true too, right? People from emerging countries now have a chance to compete, right? You don't have to show up to GTC to get a job. Even being in Toronto, showing up to GTC is super expensive, right? So I definitely think, yeah, there are a lot of benefits as well. Yeah.
So we're coming towards the hour. I wanted to ask, given that you're talking to undergrads, many of whom are first year at York, do you have any advice for folks, things that they should think about over the next 4 years, how to best take advantage of their education, not even just about games, but in general as well?
Oh, I don't know if I'm the right person for that. I don't think I was a great student or anything like that. But I would say I think a course like this existing. I was just saying that before the talk started. A course like this existing event is fantastic. I didn't have that. So the fact that a university is able to talk about things like writing in games, that you're able to hear from speakers and stuff like that, I think that's really rare and valuable. I would have loved to have something like that when I was an undergrad. So I think those things are useful. Definitely take advantage of that. I would also say, specific to game development, definitely keep making games. Make a lot of bad games, make a lot of small games, finish your games. And I didn't listen to this advice, but I do now see that it's very valuable advice. So I would say that's the number one thing. Yeah.
And the students are actually creating Twine games. Would you recommend that they put them up on itch? Yes,
please do. If you can even email me your game and I'll play it. I'm always excited for things like that. I think like Twine is a great place to start, right? There's a low barrier to entry, and try to push that medium. There's this game on Twine, but made with Twine that I played, where you play as Jeff Bezos, and the idea is that you try to spend your billions as much as you can, and like that's just a fantastic game. So there's so much you can do, and I'm sure you're all very creative. So I'll be excited to see. But yeah, post it on Twitch. Itch, and yeah, people will play it. You'll find a community. Yeah.
Fabulous. So the last question that we have in the Q&A here is from Anonymous again, asking, hopefully not putting the cart before the horse here, but what's next for you and the team once Venba launches?
Yeah, so once Venba launches, we are wondering what to do. We are brainstorming a lot of ideas, but the biggest thing is we want to take our time until we feel really strongly about an idea, as strongly as we did about Venba. We're going to be in the brainstorming phase, because what I learned while making Venba is that the game development process is very harsh sometimes. So it's really important to make a game that you enjoy making, which we do with Venba. So I want to make sure that the next game we make, whether or not people like it, we have to make sure that we like making it. To us, that's very important, and so that's what we're taking our time with it.
Words of wisdom, fantastic. Is there anything that somebody hasn't asked that you would like to share or talk about before we wrap up?
I don't know. These are all fantastic questions. I see a question in the chat that asks how they can reach up for follow-up questions. I'm just gonna enter my email here for any more follow-up. I think this was a fantastic panel. You're all asking wonderful questions. I would also ask, this is the Steam page for Venba if you want to check it out. If you're interested, please do wishlist. That goes a long way. Yeah, please feel free to reach out to me separately. But yeah, thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun.
It's been fantastic. And just so that people know, what does it mean to have your game wishlisted? Like once, when they click that button, what does that do for you?
Yeah, so if you're on Twitter or like if you're on game dev Twitter at all, you'll see every game developer being very aligned about getting you to wishlist their game, because it's the #1 metric that's predicts your sales. So if you wishlist, it means you're interested in the game. Steam takes notice that, oh, this game has a lot of people that's interested in it. So it surfaces the game more, it shows it to more people. When games launch, you see it in the front page of the Steam. A big determining factor of that is how many wishlists it has. Basically, it's just a nice way to say, I like this game and I want to see more like it, right? So it's a big deal for game developers, especially for indie developers who don't have big marketing budgets and stuff like that. They have to rely on word of mouth and things.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing so many really fabulous, specific bits of advice and insight, and just your energy and your positivity around this art form are infectious. So I know that this is going to stay with our students, but everybody who's been watching you here today. So on behalf of the Department of Cinema and Media Arts at York University, I want to say thank you so much for joining us. And I am so excited to play this. I haven't even got to play a demo of it yet. So I'm with everybody else, crossing fingers that the rest of your development process goes well and that you have a really successful launch.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really happy for this opportunity. Yeah, thanks a lot. I'm blown away by this panel. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to all our questioners and the folks in the chat. It's been really fantastic questions as well.
Oh, sorry. I see one person who's commenting that I'm going to send my email one more time. If not, it's abhi@venbagame.com, just so it's clear. Cool. Thank you so much. Sorry to interrupt.
Thank you. And thank you for putting that into the video. Wonderful. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and the same to the audience. Thank you for joining us.
Bye.
Bye-bye.